of setting this up for us, I noticed in the credits that there were development labs from as far back as 9 years ago. So obviously it's a project that you've been thinking about for some time. And I'm wondering if there was an inciting event or situation or something that sparked this idea for you.
I think it's hard to say exactly one event. It's kind of an amalgamation of many things. Of course, primarily has to do with something about the place side of the city I live in, which is Singapore, right? Singapore being quite unabashedly one of the most kind of surveillance camera per capita kind of city, and it's more about my everyday, Singapore is like a very dense city, like many other cities now. It's like you're living directly across your neighbor, and you open the window and you stare at them, and they stare back at you, and you know each other's routines and habits, and then at the same time knowing that the state is watching you, watching other people. So it's like a three-way stare down or something. I think this situation for me is really kind of what sort of sparked the initial ideas. But as you say, it's like maybe 10 years ago when we first had this film and we pitched it, and it didn't go anywhere. We hit a block in terms of funding and financing, and so we had to shelve it. And it was only after I finished Alain Imagine, my previous film, that we managed to again sort of take it back out from the shelves and find the support and financing that we needed to realize the film. Yeah, so of course in between a lot has changed, and I did a lot of rewriting, updating it to the person that I am, compared to 10 years ago, and also things like the discourse on surveillance that has changed so much. I mean, after all, there was that pandemic, and I think in that pandemic a lot has changed in terms of surveillance, how we now coexist with them.
Listen, it's just even more widespread and accepted.
Absolutely. I think we're no longer even asking the question anymore, right? Like before it was like, should we allow these encroachments on privacy and all these things very rapidly? And I think has something to do with the pandemic, that no one's asking these questions anymore. It's like during the pandemic, there was another kind of question that came up, which was like, you need to be self-surveillance to be morally responsible, right? For the existence of, it's like an existential thing, you need the self-surveillance so that people know where you are, right? Like who you meet and all. So it's like a 180, 360 flip on how we understand surveillance. And my feeling right now is like, no, we're no longer going back to those discussions before. Now we're just talking about how do we coexist with surveillance in our lives now.
So you talk about surveillance as an idea emerging from your lived experience, but I think surveillance is also a very cinematic subject.
Absolutely, because I was sharing this in the panel just now that if once I had this idea and I started pitching the film, everybody I pitch to will tell me, "Oh, have you seen this film? There is this other film that's about surveillance."
And what were they talking about? Rear Window or?
Rear Window was the obvious one. Caché, right? Haneke's Caché. David Lynch's Lost Highway. The idea of someone sending a video of themselves. Let's see, Conversation, of course, came up. Yeah, the usual suspects, right? But then, it really got me thinking that actually nothing new of what I'm doing. It's really me sort of continuing on a tradition of voyeurism and surveillance in cinema, because cinema is so obsessed with, so fixated with the voyeur, and it probably has something to do with cinema. We want to watch people, and sometimes even better if they don't know we're watching, right? Yeah.
I mean, that's cinema. That's the illusion
Exactly.
of voyeurism. Like we're all, yeah.
yeah.
But I'm wondering if, you mentioned these films and in particular Cachet and Lost Highway have like a very similar setup in the sense of it's a couple who are receiving just documentation of their being surveilled, like, in the form of this mysterious media. But I think all three films go in very different directions. And I'm wondering if you can talk about, what you wanted. This, I think it's a very vivid and compelling premise to start with, but then your film, for me at least, goes in completely unpredictable directions. And I'm wondering if you can talk about like whether you knew that's how you wanted to evolve the film, or like whether it was you said it was a long process of rewriting, and whether it changed a lot in that sense, and just in terms of narrative movement.
Right. I think I was very interested in I mean, over and beyond the surveillance, which, I mean, surveillance is it's a device, it's like a device for the film, but I was much more interested in understanding, how should I put it, like ways of seeing, or like, to live as an image, to be seen, I feel like this for me is something that, if I'm continuing that conversation of surveillance in movies and voyeurism, I think what for me is even more stark in this current moment is that we live in an unprecedented moment of being watched and watching others. I mean, through our phones, right, through social media, through like this, it's unprecedented. Like we don't even understand what this is doing to us as a human race. It's like we've never been so intensely watched and are watching others. Our very existence is tied up to being seen on some level. Like I need to be liked and followed and subscribed, and if not, I might not exist. On some level. And I think that kind of anxieties, and for me, it's in a way I was trying to, for me it was even more important than the fact of surveillance in our lives now. So I really wanted to look into maybe what we call like more philosophical element to this project, which is that, because I from very early on we decided I don't want to do a sci-fi movie. I mean, easily this could also have become a lot more like high science fiction of surveillance, but that was not my intention, because I really wanted to look into to the issues of what lies really in our hearts, in terms of like watching and being watched. Yeah.
Can you say a bit about how this theme of surveillance informed your approach to, I guess, the form of the film or the visual language of the film? Just surveillance is, the act of looking or, watching or being watched, and I guess how that idea informs in cinematic language, like perspective, or, and also mediation, like, which is something your film works with a lot, like many different types of footage that are combined in different ways and layered in different ways. So I feel like the themes are really embedded in the form of the film.
Yeah, is how you put it, like mediation. For me, is like there is no more relationships in our lives that is unmediated. There's no more. On many levels, there's almost very little interaction of our lives that is, maybe we encounter someone immediately and the next step is like, okay, let's exchange Instagram or something. It's like, on some level, like dating now, there is no dating that's unmediated on some level, right? So our relationships and everything is so mediated that for me, that whether we call it virtual, it has overtaken the non-virtual in so much more ways, and this became a really important way that I wanted to tell the story, right? Whether is it through the lensing of it, which we were, and at the same time subjectivities or perspectives, right? like the choice of using the zoom lens and all these things. I mean, we discussed that. I think that's the most that we were discussing about, rather than oh, it should look like this film or not. It was really about like, how do we capture the subjectivities, and then put them through that mediation. I call it like kind of through a dark glass, through a glass darkly. Like, you're never really, like, at some point you don't know also what to trust, right? I mean, yeah, that's what happens when things get mediated upon mediation. Like, you trust what you see, and that's what the image is, but what lies behind the image, or has the image become more real than what is it trying to capture? Like, I think all of those are very much part of the idea of creating that cinematic language in the film.
To come back to this idea of watching and being watched, I think the film maybe puts forward the argument. It's I think made explicit in one scene or one line of dialogue that watching something will also change the thing that is being watched. And I'm wondering if you agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I mean, it's on all different sides of the watching. For me, it's like you can't for me, it's like you can't be seeing something without actually projecting some level of your own humanity onto the person that you're seeing. You know, you have to make sense of what you're seeing, or else it would just be just a meaningless mess. You know, so at the end we're projecting a lot of ourselves onto the thing that we're seeing, and that changes you somehow. You know, just as well, knowing that you're being watched changes everything. I mean, there's a lot of criticism about surveillance, but at the same time, a lot of people think that it's really important and really good, and somehow it gives us a lot of sense of security, right? But for me, the maybe one of my most, I don't know if it's a critic, but it's like a fear of being under a state of constant watch or observation, is that we are starting to lose our human potential. And maybe I borrowed this idea from like quantum physics, that like there's a photon that will move, like, you know, it moves in a potential of waves until you start looking at it, and then it starts moving in a straight line. And that's true for us, you know. Knowing that you're being watched makes you move in a straight line. You know, like, what are all the possibilities that could have been? And I'm worried, like, yeah, in this current state that we are in.
I'm just going to ask one more, and then we'll open it up. I think it's a very strong ensemble cast, but I think there's one actor who stands out just as a known figure, a known face, really. Lee Kang-cheng, who we know from, mainly I think from the films of Taiwanese filmmaker Tsai Ming-liang. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the decision to put him in this, you know, key role, and what it was like to work with somebody who just automatically brings so much cinema
Yeah.
with him in his presence.
Yep. So as you know, I'm writing a role who is like a silent voyeur. So it's like a no-brainer for me, like that immediately Lee Kang-cheng comes to mind. At some point as I was writing the film, I already started to think about him, although I'm trying to say like, okay, maybe we won't be able to get Lee Kang-cheng, so I shouldn't be so fixated, but I couldn't help it. So I was kind of really writing with him in mind, and thankfully we managed to get him his timing and everything to be able to participate in the film, because we sent him the script and he was like, I really like it, I want to be part of this, so I'm going to accommodate whatever I can just so that I can be in this film, and I'm eternally grateful for that, because he is a wonderful human being, over and above like a great actor. And if you if you've seen his films, his body of work, it's like no wonder, because he doesn't do dialogues, and his films have like very minimal dialogues, very silent. That's why he has this mastery of his body language that is so powerful, like his gaze. It kills me. I'm sitting behind the monitor and behind the camera, and I see him, and I died. Like it's like he brought to the role and the character so much that was not on the page. It's like his humanity appeared on screen, and all of a sudden it's like this voyeur, you're making me fall in love with him, Yeah, I end up falling in love with the voyeur, almost more than the kids he was watching, right? And for me, that was like the magic of Lee Kang-shen. Like, once I put him in front of that camera, he embodied it and more. He's like just as you put it. It's like sometimes Lee Kang-shen is. You don't just see him as Lee Kang-shen, like one person, but it's like the layers of Lee Kang-shen, and all the Lee Kang-shen that we've ever seen sort of comes back, like rushes back at me sometimes when I see it, when I see him again on screen. And that was, sorry, I'm gushing, I'm a fan. So,